I now invite Walter Lohmann, Director of Heritage's Asian Studies Center, to come on screen. We hope you enjoy the program.
Good morning. Good evening to friends in the Indo-Pacific. I'm Walter Lohmann, Director of the Asian Studies Center at the Heritage Foundation. I'm really glad you could join us for this discussion this morning about the current situation in Burma. We're very honored today to have with us the Foreign Minister of the National Unity Government of Burma, Daw Zin Mar Aung. I'll introduce her shortly here for her remarks, but first I wanted to introduce a longtime friend of Burma and the cause of democracy in Burma, Senate Republican leader Mitch McConnell, for some brief remarks. Since the 1990s, when building on his experience as a leader against apartheid in South Africa, he took the lead in sanctioning the Burma military regime of that era. Senator McConnell has been the go-to person in Washington on anything involving Burma. That's for 25 years. This was the case throughout the 2000s and up until President Obama sought his partnership to respond to what was then political change, positive political change in the country. Through all these years, even if once in a while we may have disagreed with the way that Senator McConnell approached the issue, particularly the partnership with Obama, I know people in the movement, the supporters of Burma know that Senator McConnell's primary concern has always been the liberty of the Burmese people. So we're very pleased that he chose to share with us his thoughts in the introduction to this program today.
Hello, I'm Senator Mitch McConnell. Historically, even among foreign policy experts, Burma has received very little attention here in Washington, but its struggle for democracy and self-determination has been a personal focus of mine for many decades. I've known Aung San Suu Kyi for many years. We corresponded while she was under house arrest. Over the years, I've done my best to advocate for the people of Burma, to lift up the focus for good in their country, to support the pro-democracy movement, and to impose costs on the military junta that has so often suppressed the will of the people. And I've done my level best to keep the plight of Burma's people in full view of policymakers here in Washington, even when atrocities and injustices committed against them were not on the front page of our newspapers. The way I see it, supporting our friends in the cause of democracy is one of the best ways to honor our own. Even more so today as China seeks to expand its malign influence throughout Southeast Asia, including Burma. Unfortunately, the coup and the junta's brutal violence against its own people have brought Burma back to the center of the international stage without any help from us. The Tatmadaw has stolen not just an election, but the country from the people. The junta has detained democratically elected leaders. They've gunned down hundreds of pro-democracy advocates for demonstrating peacefully in the streets. They've imprisoned thousands of protesters on sham charges. They've detained foreign expert advisors to the democratically elected government on key reforms as hostages. In short, the military has declared war on its own people. The resilience of the people of Burma has been nothing short of inspiring. The injustice has brought young and old to the streets. It has led Burma's ethnic majority and its ethnic minorities together to focus on their shared democratic aspirations. And it's spurred real bipartisan action right here in the United States. I've been in close touch with the Biden administration on Burma, discussing how to best support the opposition to the junta while standing up new targeted sanctions and export licensing bans to hit the leaders of the military coup where it hurts, right in the wallet. And I've been encouraged by the administration's swift response. Now, the junta is listed alongside regimes like the ones in China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, Venezuela, Cuba, and Syria, and subject to the strictest military end-user controls. The U.S. has marked the junta's most prominent generals and holding companies for additional crippling prohibitions. But the people of Burma are still waiting. They're waiting for the international community to join in wider condemnation of this forced military rule and to recognize and support the democratically elected national unity government. They're waiting for the UN Security Council to overcome its most intransigent members and levy serious sanctions and arms embargoes of its own. and they're waiting for much needed humanitarian aid for the growing number of internally displaced persons along the border with Thailand. But unfortunately, to Moscow or Beijing, military intimidation and brutal suppression of dissent, including dissolving opposition political parties, aren't outrageous violations of fundamental norms. They're second nature. So if consensus cannot be found at the UN Security Council, then the U.S. and its democratic partners should force China or Russia to veto measures intended to restore democracy in Burma, clarifying for the world who stands with the people of Burma on the right side of history. Frankly, there's no greater gift the free world could give the Chinese Communist Party than by staying silent as a promising democratic movement is suffocated in its own backyard. For far too long, a corrupt military and outside forces like the PRC have played minority groups against one another to ensure that self-determination remains a pipe dream. They know that a Burma divided against itself is easier to manipulate and exploit than a robust democracy. But today, Burma's oppressors face a new and encouraging resolve among its citizens. Even as the international community has been slow to unite behind them, the people of Burma have shown the potential to heal even the country's deepest ethnic divisions. And they've demonstrated courage and a commitment to freedom that stands in contrast to the junta's cowardice in slaughtering young and old. When this movement prevails, the exiled leaders of the NUG will have crucial tasks before them, turning widespread opposition to the military coup into united support for a lasting democracy for all of Burma's people, urgently making long overdue reforms to Burma's economy, constitution, and security institutions, and showing that nationwide reconciliation is the only real path forward to a democratic future. So I'm grateful to the Heritage Foundation for putting this spotlight on Burma. I'm grateful to all of you for your work and interest and commitment to this important cause. And I'm especially glad that Daw Zin Mar Aung, the NUG foreign minister, is able to join and participate today. Thank you for being with us. Please never doubt the United States of America and our people are pulling hard for your success. Thank you for the opportunity to be with you today.
Thank you. I'm very glad that Senator McConnell was able to offer those remarks, to record that for us. He truly is a historic figure on Burma policy. Going back to the 1990s, single-handedly drawing attention to the plight of the Burmese people at a time where people really were not very focused on it. And now he's back in the ring again, fighting the same battle that has very, very much the same hallmarks as 25 years ago, unfortunately. Well, now it's my honor to introduce Foreign Minister of the National Unity Government, Daw Zin Mar Aung. Daw Zin Mar has just assumed this role since March. Of course, it wasn't necessary until last year's coup that there be such a government in internal exile, essentially. She's only taken the post since last March, but don't let her youthful looks fool you. Daw Zin Mar is a veteran of Burma's struggle for democracy. Prior to her election to the lower house in 2015, she was a leader in Burma's civil society movement. And before that, she spent an unfortunately long period of time as a political prisoner in Burma for her activism. Thank you, Daw Zin Mar, for your service in the cause of freedom. I'd like to invite you now to turn on your camera and present us your remarks.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone, and thank you so much, Walter, for that kind and generous introductions. I want to say a big thank you to the Heritage Foundations for hosting this event and for giving me the opportunity to brief on the current situations in Myanmar. I would like to also thank you, my colleague, Mr. Htin Ling Aung, for helping to join this event. Actually, it has been over 100 days since the military illegally seized power from the duly elected civilian government and systematically dismantled the country's democratic institutions. It continues to murder civilians and elected members of the parliament, demolish press freedom and individual liberties, and detain anyone publicly voicing opposition to its rule by violence. As of yesterday, there are recorded 827 deaths committed by the security forces, and 4,313 people, including our political leaders, has been arrested, charged, or sentenced. These figures may be more in reality. It is critical to highlight this data to constantly remind ourselves of the tragedy that the military brought upon the people of Myanmar and atrocity it's perpetuated to retain its illegally seized power. It is very clear that the conspirators of the coup do not serve the people's interest. They are only interested in protecting themselves. The military no longer protects the people of Myanmar. Instead, they are destroying the life and the interests of Myanmar, including airstrikes on its own people in Chin, Kachin, Kayar, and Kayan state, slaughters of civilians in every state and regions. A humanitarian crisis is worsening with the influx of refugees at the border areas, and the number of internally displaced people increase as these security situations across the country deteriorates. The current political crisis has disrupted the economy and created uncertainty leading to instability. The current situation is an indication that the coup has failed, and the State Administration Council does not control the country. As long as the military remains in power, the people of Myanmar are determined, to demand a return to a democracy, and thus the country remains at high risk of further escalating violence, the collapse of the economy, instability at the border areas, and social instability. Actually, it is also important to highlight the regional and global implications of the coup d'etat. Our situation is a threat not just to the Myanmar democracy, but also to a global democracy. If military juntas succeed, it shows that military power and unchecked totalitarian regime can take over democracy. We don't want Myanmar to be a precedent for other democratic countries around the world. Our situation is a manifestation of the possible great challenge against democracy in the world. The instability in our country also allows the transnational crimes to increase across our borders, and this will have a long-term impact on regional peace and security. The military actions have, reverberated across the associations of Southeast Asian nations, presenting the body with the greatest challenge to its legitimacy in well over a decade. While ASEAN has tried to rely on its members to address the military's assault on ASEAN values, sadly, the military rejected the so-called ASEAN 5 points consensus even before returning to Myanmar from Indonesia. ASEAN now feels greater pressure as a result, with the body now in the midst of an existential crisis as its efforts to address the chaos have failed. Meanwhile, the militaries continue to undermine democracy, human rights, and good governance, which is mentioned in the ASEAN Charter. Recently, they tried to ban the NLD as a political party on May 21 press conference, and changing the commander-in-chief's retirement age, meaning that the military has no intention of ever restoring democracy, continued crime against humanity around the country, including airstrike on its own people in ethnic areas, and a slaughter of civilian in every state and regions. The military has ruthlessly attacked and jailed doctors and nurses, and its violence has brought the country's health system to a standstill. While the previous government had made major investment in modernizations of the country's health system through smart loans from the World Bank, The military has militarized hospitals, restricting any opponents of its military dictatorships from access to life-saving health. This, combined with its ongoing rule by violence, has sent many people across the border into China, Thailand, especially Thailand, Bangladesh, and India. This has played a role in the spread of COVID-19, causing significant cross-border infections in China, Thailand, and Bangladesh. Moving forward, the military's failure at governance will cripple mainland Southeast Asia's response to the pandemic and could delay the region's recovery by 6 months or more, costing neighboring economy billions of dollars in lost GDPs. This is a viable alternative, actually, on the other hand, to current political crisis. As a government backed by the people of Myanmar, we at the National Unity Government have been tirelessly working to lay down the principle and roadmap to bring political, economic, and social stability back. Let me highlight the significant political milestone we have achieved so far, not only as a committee representing Phitangsu Hluttaw, but more importantly as the National Unity Government of Myanmar. We have formed the National Unity Government as a government with the most inclusive and diverse cabinet members in the history of Myanmar, with 9 women and 12 ethnic leaders in key cabinet positions. National Unity Government is leading the executive sectors of the Union of Republic of Myanmar, exercising the mandate and powers conferred by the people of Myanmar in the 2020 general elections. We have promulgated a charter, which we call the Federal Democracy Charter, that reflects the collective interests of our people and emphasize peace building at the core of the state building. When I was confirmed as the Minister of Foreign Affairs in April last month, I made my commitment to the irreversible implementations of the Federal Democracy Charter. The Charter guides our works and stipulates the fundamental principles and roadmap to address the legitimate grievances of all the people of Myanmar through a federal democracy. It is also essential to highlight that the Charter is an outcome of an extensive dialogue between the committee representing Phitangsu Hluttaw, ethnic organizations, civil disobedience movement leaders, political parties, civil society, including women and young. We know that the only way to resolve the political issue in Myanmar and establish long-term peace and stability is to establish federal union that will guarantee rights to the other federal states and ethnic nationalities. We have already abolished the 2008 Constitution. This is a fundamental step towards transitioning the military under civilian control. The military has repeatedly used that 2008 Constitution to instigate political and economic instability in the country. As part of the Charter's roadmap, the Constitutional Conventions shall be convened to develop and validate a new federal constitution. We have rescinded the illegal associations of all ethnic organizations, EAO, in recognition of their legitimate grievances and as a step towards forging national unity and reconciliation. Due to the violent crackdown of the State Administration Council's security forces, in the absence of international responsibility to protect, people in different regions prepare to protect themselves. The NUG has the responsibility to protect our people and end the civil war of over 70 years, implement effective security sector reforms, and establish federal democratic forces to end the violent actions and military aggressions and hostility of the military council. There are 2 interlinked priorities that NUG needs full support. One, an exit strategy for the military and revert Myanmar back to civilian democratic rules. And the second one is the implementation of the Charter and prepare NUG for the post-State Administration Council period. The most urgent issue we need to address is to defeat the gender and revert back to civilian democratic governance. As part of our national strategy, we continue to engage with the ethnic organizations, CDM leaders, political parties, and civil society leaders across the country to align the strategy to put pressure against Min Aung Hlaing and his State Administration Council. While we continue to push for our internet strategy, we would like to urge the government of the international community to take all necessary actions unilaterally and through multilateralism to put pressure against military, the State Administration Council, and the countries supporting them. There is a need to cut its weapon supply and cut the impunity, and to support Enug and Ethnic organization as deemed appropriate to strengthen our approach against the regime. In this regard, we understand the limitations of the different countries to recognize governments, and a continued public engagement with the national unity government is a significant message that the international communities is engaging supporting the democratic forces. We need the global platform to amplify not just the atrocity being committed by the military, but also the positive stories that are coming out of this political crisis. So we would like to mobilize diplomatic relations to influence big regional and global power with high interest in Myanmar to support national unity government. We call on the international community to mobilize its influence to multilateral institutions and regional partners to engage key regional and geopolitical stakeholders such as China, Japan, South Korea, ASEAN, and the Quad to support Enug effort to bring Myanmar back under democratic civilian government. The Enug is currently taking appropriate steps to implement 2021 Federal Democracy Charter. The following are a few examples. We will continue dialogue process between the National Unity Government and other democratic forces to finalize National Unity Consultative Council and UCC. The process of drafting new constitution based on the 5 guiding principles stipulates in the charter has already begun. This process is headed by the Ministry of Federal Affairs from the National Unity Government. At the same time, the Ministry of Defense is currently setting up defense and security structure and code of conduct to mitigate the risk of escalating of violence due to emerging people's military initiative. We also understand the importance of the inclusions in the National Unity Government's works, that we continue to reach out to all other groups. We recognize the Rohingya populations as part of the issues we need to address, and their voluntary, safe, and dignified return is one of our key priorities, according to the Kofi Annan Commission's report. However, let us be clear that as long as military holds power, conditions for safe and dignified return will remain elusive. But we are now working and discussing with all the stakeholders in Rakhine State, including Rakhine and the Rohingya community. Myanmar's effort to hold Thammador accountable through its domestic judicial system has been exhausted. That's why we are also exploring an opportunity to ratify the Rome Statute to ensure that the military is held accountable in the International Criminal Courts for its crime under international law. With your continued support, we are optimistic that we will be able to return to democracy and end the decades of physical and structural violence repeatedly inflicted on our people by the Myanmar military. So I really appreciate, and our deepest appreciation to all of you for your solidarity to our country and giving me that kind of floor. Thank you.
Thank you so much for those remarks. They were very, very helpful and very encouraging in many ways. As you were speaking, I was thinking about how extraordinary it is that, and really take for granted the technology that we can use. Here I am in the comfort of my own house in Virginia, with really, in the overall scheme of things, not a worry in the world. Let's face it. And there you are in Burma, right on the cusp of breaking developments, and really with your life and your security and your your health on the line every day. And so I think that's an important thing to recognize. But you know, if there is one thing different than the 90s when we went through this, it is that technology. You know, that is the one big difference, I think, and that we couldn't do this even in the 2000s as we went through the saffron revolution and everything else. There was not this opportunity, and so I hope that you're right, that you are able to mobilize international opinion and create a more continually interested public outside of Burma. I wanted to bring into this conversation now Htin Ling Aung, who is the National Unity Government Special Representative for International Relations, based in Washington, D.C., near here, in fact, in Maryland. Htin himself is a veteran of the student movement, as well as a former political prisoner. I want to thank him as well for all that he's done over the years in the cause of liberty in Burma. And I invite him to join us, so he can turn on his camera. He can join us for the Q&A here. Daw Zin Mar, the one thing I wanted to ask you here right off the bat is about U.S. policy. You know, this was something that we coordinated in very difficult ways over the years with dissidents in Burma and supporters of the movement. But I wanted to ask you, since we have this opportunity to get it directly from you, what do you think about the current U.S. approach, and specifically, what do you think about how we approach sanctions?
The question is for me.
It's for either of you, but if you'd like to start, and then maybe Htin can chime in. But basically, the question is, do you like the sanctions approach? Is that helping you? Is that something we ought to do more of? How should we structure? How should we structure them in the way that would be most useful?
Yeah, I would say it's something is better than nothing. These sanctions, it's initially it's kinds of response that condemn the military coup d'etat. So it should be the very initial stage. But I think we still need to follow up whether the military take care of sanctions, and what their behavior will change through that kind of sanctions or not. So we still need to see very closely whether it is workable or not. If not, that's why we are continuously demand more and more pressure, not just only the sanctions, but also others diplomatic pressures and others embargoes or something like that. So yeah, so this is just briefly, sanction is still work, but not enough.
Not enough. And so would you say that they need to be more broad? I mean, up until 2016, really, there was a very broad set of sanctions imposed on Burma, including investment and trade and many other things. Are you suggesting that, or is a targeted approach better?
Yeah, we prefer targeted sanctions instead of blanket sanctions. So because military is still military, and their empire and their relatives still have privilege, not just in the politics but also in economic empire. So that's why this blanket sanction is really still effective for those the military dictators and their empires, their families and their relatives. Actually, they really take care, because they really take care of their own interest, not for the country's interest.
Yeah, well, if technology has changed in 20 years, that's one thing that hasn't changed in 20 years. The military is really only concerned with the military and their lives and their fortunes and their families and everything else. Htin, anything you'd like to add there?
Yes, I want to add a little bit more, if I may. For example, we like to have more and more sanctions to come, so to make the military weaken, because sanction is one of the tools that we like to use to make, like you said, the military weaken, and that's why we encourage the U.S. to impose the coordinated, targeted sanctions to cut off the hunters, financial flows through any and all means possible.
Mm.
History has taught us that unilateral sanctions don't work, and that's why I urge the U.S. to use its influence across the board to coordinate with like-minded allies and partners in ensuring the effective sanctions program. I've got a few immediate examples. For example, cutting off the hunters' access to global financial markets via Singapore, Thailand, Malaysia, and calling for an arms embargo, as well as imposing sanctions on any and all financial institutions that facilitate arms transactions for the Myanmar military, and tightening restrictions around MOGE in collaboration with EU, South Korea, and Thailand to escrow payments to prevent directly flowing to the military. That is very important, very, very important. We wish to make the clarification that this is not a call against the existing U.S. investments in Burma or any future foreign investments to the country after Myanmar's rightfully elected government has been fully restored. It's very clear. But the NUG believes U.S. and Western businesses to be the gold standard in both practice and ethics, and we look forward to seeing more investments in the future, but only after the people's government, NUG, has been rightfully restored to power. So we call on the private sector today to work with us, with the NUG, and find creative solutions in ensuring that your payments, do not go to benefit the military at all. So payments that are being made to, just a little bit more, payments that are being made to or accessible by the military through its illegal seize of the state apparatus are payments that are funding further bloodshed of the Burmese people. Thank you.
Sure, but the investments from international corporations in and of themselves are not a problem. It's the flow to the military, and we have to find ways to get at that flow to the military, if I understand you correctly. Yes. So even in the interim, before NUG comes to power and we have a new constitution and everything else, you're not calling for a boycott. You're calling for a way to control the revenue flows so that they do not empower and enrich the military. Am I summarizing that correctly? Okay.
Yes, exactly. That's what I meant.
Okay, that's terrific. Well, I wanted to ask you, I was planning on asking you about the Rohingya issue, but I think you probably already heard that from many people in Washington, our continuing interest in that. As you can imagine, Aung San Suu Kyi really disappointed many of us with her approach to that. I mean, it's hard to overstate the amount of disappointment there was in the way that she handled that, and in fact, so much so that it's discredited her in many circles. I mean, it's hard to imagine her leading this this next struggle for democracy for those reasons. So I'm glad to hear your reassurances on that point. And so I won't belabor that. I'm glad to hear your very positive comments on that, and I commend you for those. We did get a couple questions in from the audience that I'd like to ask you in our remaining 10 minutes or so here. One is, how do you overcome the challenge of not being able to vet the Enug through elections and still ensure continued popular support? So you were elected, and so you already have, that is, Daw Zin Mar, you were elected, and U Thint represents an elected government, essentially. But if this continues, this current situation continues, and I imagine it will, despite the military's promise of elections. I think even if you have elections, they're going to be sham elections, like sham process like you had in Thailand. But given that, over the long term, how do you maintain popular support without having to go to the ballot box and campaign?
Sorry, Walter, I can hear your earlier parts of your questions because of my connection.
The question is really without elections, and this situation could drag on, without legitimate real elections. How do you, as a movement, maintain popular support over the long term?
Actually, there was recent elections, 2020 November elections, very recently, so they can't guarantee, the military and even the 2008 constitution can't guarantee. It's, totally depends on the will of the dictators and the military. So that's why people of Myanmar will not agree whether, new elections is coming. So that's why, the trust between the military leaders and the people is already destroyed. So that's why, we are, as long as, we are in line with the people interest. So we don't need, any elections again, because nobody believe, because every, some of the recently the international observers also, launched their reports and their observations. 2020 elections is not it really totally reflect the the people. And then also the reason why the military coup d'etat is not, on the strong, it's not a strong reason. It's already show what did and what does the military is, respond, and it's just only for the reason to make a coup d'etat.
Yeah, the remarkable thing about the military's objection to the election is that it was no surprise to anyone except them, I guess, because the margins of support for your movement is pretty consistent. It's a landslide levels over many years, 2015 to 1990 even. So they seem to be the only one surprised and the only one who thinks that there would have to be fraud involved, because everybody knew they were going to lose the election. One thing I wanted to ask you about, another thing, and frankly, something that I think Washington was a little bit disappointed with Suu Kyi's government, was the approach to China. Because I think the strongest supporters of Burma saw it as, we were the ones in the trenches here working for Burma for so long. And then before she even became state councilor, she visited China, and she seemed to have a good relationship there. I don't know if NUG, if and when NUG comes to power, how do you see the relationship with China? And I'll invite U Thint as well to comment on that. But Daw Zin Mar, would you like to start?
All right, it's very, I think it's very simple and very clear. The what I when you ask the questions, I remind what Daw San said. That we can move as a country. We cannot move our country even though we don't like our neighboring. So we cannot move as a house, as a country. You can move, and then at the same time, China is not just only our neighbor, but also the the superpower, and there are so many challenge around the borders, and so I think that's why he's very, I think, instead of approaching our former allies, so I think it's much more practical. But at the same time, I think it doesn't mean that he is not banning our former democratic alliance, because I think she is very much I think, how can I say, he is very sure, for sure, is that U.S. and others democratic not especially need to approach or something like that. I think this is what I'm thinking, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, no, there is a certain practical side of it, no question about that. I can understand. I can certainly understand that, especially on the security side. In fact, I think a lot of attention is paid to the economic benefits, and that's sort of as Beijing would like it, for us to focus on the economic benefits. But they also, in some ways, they're a threat, right? I mean, they're a security threat in some ways. They're support for ethnic insurgencies and things like that. So it's something that you have to deal with. I accept that. Htin, did you want to add anything there?
I just have a little bit on that, because
Sure.
like the minister said, we cannot move out of this house, let's say that way. That is one thing, and we want to see a good neighbor. Our neighbors are behaving good to us, and we will be behaving to our neighbors to be a good neighbor also, in mutual respect. And another thing I want to add is China has a lot of interest in Burma, as they've got a lot of investment in Burma already. So I believe China's interest to prevent Burma's I mean, it is in China's interest to prevent Burma's collapse, and I have no doubt that Chinese leaders and Chinese government will want to see the peace and stability in Burma, because that will benefit them also and their investments. Otherwise, they cannot do any investment in Burma until the stability has come and restored. So we hope they will do a smart thing and the right thing. So without engaging with the NUG, there's no way, and they have to. I mean, they have to be. I believe they are smart. They are smart. They are already smart.
Well, that's for sure. I mean, I think that's your challenge, is to convince them that you are the only way to stability, because I think they're neutral on the means that are used to establish stability. And if they think that the military can do it, fine with them,
Yes.
So you have to convince them that there is no stability without a civilian elected government, and that will be a major challenge. We're about to wrap up here. Before we do, I did want to say, we've touched a couple times on Daw Su and her tenure and the criticism that she's faced, but I very much care about her continuing safety and her freedom. And if anything is to happen to her, I think you will find Washington united again behind her cause. If still a little little reflective of the last 5 years and things that have been done or haven't been done, I think people will rally to her once again and support her, and there would be terrible consequences were anything to happen to her, not just in Washington, but in the international community. So I pray for her continued safety and freedom, as well as yours, Daw Zin Mar, and I applaud you for your bravery. In fact, wish you Godspeed, and we hope to welcome you here someday and give you the Congressional Medal of Freedom when all this is said and done. So thank you very much for joining us, for helping us bring attention to this issue. Good luck to you, and hope to see you in person sometime.